The dust never settles in Missouri. Not really. It hangs in the air like a question that nobody wants to answer, clinging to the wooden storefronts and the tired faces of men who've seen too much. In the years following the Civil War, the border states became something else entirely. Not North, not South, just broken. And in that brokenness, certain men found opportunity. Jesse Woodson James was one of them. But this isn't a story about Jesse James becoming a legend. This is about what happens when legends refuse to die quietly, and when the machinery of justice becomes something far more ruthless than the outlaws it hunts. This is about the Pinkertons and the deadly game they played in the shadows of America's frontier, with a line between law and obsession blurred until it disappeared completely. The year is 1874, and Allan Pinkerton sits in his Chicago office staring at a telegram that makes his jaw tighten. Another train robbery. Another humiliation. The James Younger gang has struck again, this time making off with thousands from a Rock Island Railroad express car, and the newspapers are having a field day. They're calling Jesse James a modern Robin Hood, a Confederate hero fighting against Northern oppression. It makes Pinkerton sick. Allan Pinkerton didn't build America's first detective agency by accepting failure. He protected Abraham Lincoln from assassination. He'd run counterintelligence operations during the war. He'd tracked down counterfeiters, murderers, and thieves across a fractured nation. But Jesse James and his brother Frank had become something else. They weren't just criminals. They were symbols. And symbols, Pinkerton knew, were dangerous things. He calls in his best men. William Pinkerton, his own son. Robert Pinkerton, equally capable, equally driven. These aren't ordinary lawmen. The Pinkerton National Detective Agency operates beyond the constraints of local sheriffs and territorial marshals. They cross state lines without hesitation. They have resources that most law enforcement could only dream of. And they have something else too. They have patience. The kind of patience that turns a manhunt into a siege. The plan begins simply enough. Surveillance. The Pinkertons send operatives into Missouri posing as farmhands, traveling salesmen, sympathetic Confederates. They rent rooms in boarding houses. They drink in saloons. They listen. Because in a place like Clay County, where Jesse James grew up, where his mother still lives, where half the population remembers him as a boy and the other half won't betray him out of principle or fear, information is harder to extract than gold from stone. The operatives report back in coded letters. Jesse moves constantly. He's never in one place long enough to establish a pattern. He uses aliases. He changes his appearance. Sometimes he's a cattleman. Sometimes a grain buyer. He trusts almost no one outside his immediate circle. And even within that circle, paranoia runs deep. Frank James is more cautious still, a thinking man's outlaw, always 3 moves ahead. But the Pinkertons have advantages that Jesse doesn't fully comprehend yet. They have a network spanning dozens of cities. They have relationships with railroad executives who want blood for their losses. They have political connections that reach into governors' mansions and federal offices. And most importantly, they have no intention of playing fair. The operatives start applying pressure in ways that don't make headlines. A farmer known to be sympathetic to the James family finds his credit suddenly called in by the bank. A shopkeeper who once gave Frank James a meal discovers that suppliers won't deliver to him anymore. It's subtle at first. Economic warfare waged in whispers and ledgers. The message spreads through Clay County like fever. Helping the James brothers comes with a price. Jesse feels the noose tightening even if he can't see all the threads. He becomes more erratic. He moves his wife Z and their infant son more frequently, sometimes in the dead of night, leaving behind rented houses with half-eaten meals on the table. The strain shows in Z's face. She aged 10 years and 2. Her youth stolen by a life lived in constant fear of a knock on the door that might mean her husband dead or captured. The Pinkertons escalate. They begin interrogating anyone with even distant connections to the James family. These aren't polite conversations. They happen in locked rooms, lasting hours, sometimes days. They tell a cousin that they have evidence of his complicity in robbery, that he'll hang unless he cooperates. They tell a childhood friend that his family will be ruined unless he provides information. Some break. Most don't. The bonds of loyalty in Missouri run deeper than fear, forged in the shared trauma of a war that turned neighbor against neighbor. But every interrogation, even the unsuccessful ones, sends ripples through the community. People stop talking to each other, afraid that any conversation might be overheard, might be misinterpreted, might bring the Pinkertons to their door. Trust, the very foundation of these tight-knit communities, begins to corrode. This is what the Pinkertons count on. Isolation. Because an isolated man makes mistakes. In Chicago, Allan Pinkerton receives reports and grows frustrated. Months of work, significant expense, and Jesse James remains free. The newspapers continue their romanticized coverage. Dime novels appear with titles like The James Boys' Bold Robbery and Jesse James, Night of the Road. Each one sells thousands of copies. Each one makes Pinkerton's failure more public. He makes a decision that will haunt him for the rest of his life. If they cannot find Jesse through conventional surveillance, they will force him out. They will strike at the very heart of what he holds dear, at the place he always returns to, no matter how dangerous. They will strike at his mother's home. The Pinkerton operatives received their orders in January of 1875. A cold winter has settled over Missouri, the kind of cold that makes bones ache and hearts hard. The plan is presented as intelligence gathering. They believe Jesse and Frank are hiding at the James family farm outside Kearney. They intend to flush them out, to catch them in a place they feel safe. But the operatives chosen for this mission aren't the careful investigators who spent months building networks of informants. These are enforcers, men who've done the agency's dirty work before, men who understand that sometimes orders come with implications rather than explicit instructions. On the night of January 25th, they approach the James farm under cover of darkness. The house sits quiet, smoke rising from the chimney against a star-filled sky. Inside, Zerelda Samuel, Jesse's mother, sits near the fireplace with her husband, Dr. Reuben Samuel. Jesse's half-brother Archie, just 8 years old, sleeps in a nearby room. There's no sign of Jesse or Frank. The intelligence was wrong or outdated, or perhaps the brothers sensed danger and stayed away. What happens next becomes a matter of disputed accounts and conflicting testimonies. The Pinkertons will claim they intended only to illuminate the house, to see inside and confirm the presence or absence of their targets. Others will tell a different story, one of deliberate malice and reckless disregard for innocent life. Something is thrown through the window. Accounts vary on exactly what. A flare device, an incendiary meant to provide light. In the chaos and darkness, Dr. Samuel, thinking the house is under attack by common bandits, attempts to throw the device into the fireplace to extinguish it. It detonates. The explosion tears through the small room. Archie Peabody Samuel, the 8-year-old half-brother of Jesse James, dies almost instantly. Zerelda Samuel's right arm is so severely damaged that it must be amputated. The Pinkerton operatives flee into the night. Within days, the news spreads across the nation. The public reaction is immediate and devastating. Whatever sympathy the Pinkertons had, whatever moral authority they claimed in their pursuit of outlaws, evaporates in the face of a dead child and a mutilated woman. Even newspapers that once supported aggressive law enforcement turn against the agency. The term Pinkerton becomes synonymous not with justice, but with corporate brutality. Allan Pinkerton issues statements denying that his men intended harm to innocents. He claims the device was meant only for illumination, that the tragedy was an accident of circumstance. But the damage is done. Missouri's governor considers bringing charges against the operatives involved. Legislation is proposed to ban private detective agencies from operating with such impunity. The Pinkertons become what they sought to make Jesse James, public enemies. And Jesse himself becomes something more dangerous than before. The raid transforms him in the public imagination from a criminal into a victim of unjust persecution. Sympathy pours in from across the country. If he was half mythical before, he becomes fully legendary now. The man who lost his little brother to the Pinkertons' ruthlessness. The son whose mother was maimed by corporate mercenaries. Every robbery he commits afterward carries a new justification in the public mind. Revenge. But the raid accomplishes something else too, something that takes years to fully manifest. It makes Jesse paranoid in ways he wasn't before. If the Pinkertons would attack his mother's home, would endanger a child, then nowhere is truly safe. No one can truly be trusted. The psychological warfare the Pinkertons wage through economic pressure and interrogations now has a focal point, a traumatic event that Jesse cannot escape even in his quietest moments. The Pinkertons, for their part, do not withdraw. They cannot. To do so would be to admit not just failure, but moral bankruptcy. Instead, they adapt. The frontal assault having failed catastrophically, they return to slower methods. But now their work carries a different weight. They're not just hunting an outlaw. They're trying to salvage their reputation, to prove that their methods, their existence, has validity in a changing America. The operatives embed themselves deeper into Missouri life. One spends 3 years working as a telegraph operator, monitoring messages, learning patterns of communication. Another becomes a trusted figure in a neighboring county, someone people confide in, never suspecting his true allegiance. They build files, hundreds of pages of observations, rumors, associations. They map the James family network like military strategists planning a campaign. Jesse keeps moving. Kentucky, Tennessee, Texas. He uses more names than some men use in 10 lifetimes. He trusts his core gang less and less. The easy camaraderie of the early days, the Confederate guerrilla spirit that bonded them during the war, begins to fray under the weight of constant pressure. Men get tired. They want to settle down, to live normal lives. But Jesse can't let them go. Each person who leaves is a potential informant, a potential weakness. The Pinkertons exploit this. They approach former gang members with offers. Not just immunity, but money. New identities. Fresh starts. Some refuse out of loyalty. Others refuse out of fear, knowing that betraying Jesse James is signing your own death warrant. But a few waver. And in that wavering, the Pinkertons see opportunity. They plant seeds of doubt within the gang itself. A rumor here, a suspicious coincidence there. They arrange for Jesse to hear things, to see things that make him question the people around him. It's psychological manipulation of the highest order. They're not trying to catch Jesse through superior detective work anymore. They're trying to make him destroy himself. The strain on Jesse becomes visible to those close to him. His wife, Z, watches him deteriorate. He sleeps with his boots on, ready to run at a moment's notice. He trusts windows and corners less than rattlesnakes. Every stranger is a potential Pinkerton operative. Every friend is a potential Judas. The man who once rode with reckless confidence now lives in a prison of his own suspicion. The gang pulls off fewer robberies. When they do strike, the jobs are sloppier, more desperate. The younger brothers, cousins, and core members of the gang are captured in 1876 after a disastrous bank robbery attempt in Northfield, Minnesota. 3 members of the gang are dead. The youngers are sentenced to life in prison. Cole Younger, once one of Jesse's closest allies, will spend 25 years behind bars. Jesse escapes Northfield, but something breaks in him there. He's lost too many men. The invincibility he once felt, the sense that he was somehow charmed or protected by fate, disappears in the streets of that Minnesota town. He becomes more isolated. Frank begins to distance himself, tired of running, tired of the killing and the fear. The brothers who once seemed inseparable begin planning separate futures. The Pinkertons continue their surveillance, their pressure, their relentless, grinding pursuit. They know Jesse is weakening. They can see it in the pattern of his movements, in the smaller, less ambitious crimes. They can sense it in the desperation of a man running out of places to hide and people to trust. But they also know that direct confrontation won't work. Jesse is too careful, too dangerous even in his diminished state. What they need is someone on the inside, someone Jesse trusts, someone willing to betray him for the right price. They find their man in 1881. Robert Ford is young, ambitious, and eager to prove himself. He's managed to ingratiate himself with Jesse, to become part of the reduced gang that still operates. The Pinkertons don't approach Ford directly. That would be too obvious, too traceable. Instead, they work through intermediaries. Missouri Governor Thomas Crittenden, who has his own political reasons for wanting Jesse James dead or captured, becomes the public face of the reward offer. $10,000 for Jesse James, dead or alive. The Pinkertons feed intelligence to Crittenden's office. They ensure Ford knows about the reward. They create the conditions for betrayal without leaving their fingerprints on it. It's the culmination of years of psychological warfare, economic pressure, and social isolation. They've made Jesse James vulnerable not through superior force, but through systematic destruction of everything that once protected him. Jesse moves to St. Joseph, Missouri, living under the name Thomas Howard. It's 1882 now, and he's 34 years old, but looks a decade older. The years of running have carved deep lines in his face. He's planning one more robbery, one big score that might let him finally disappear for good. He trusts the Ford brothers, Robert and Charlie, enough to bring them into his home, into his life. On the morning of April 3rd, Jesse does something he rarely does anymore. He removes his revolvers. It's a hot day, and he's preparing to hang a picture on the wall, trying to make the rented house feel more like a home for Z and their children. For just a moment, he lets his guard down. For just a moment, he's not the legendary outlaw, the man the Pinkertons have hunted for nearly a decade. He's just a tired man in his shirt sleeves, standing on a chair, straightening a frame. Robert Ford sees his opportunity and takes it. The betrayal is intimate, domestic, cowardly by any measure the outlaw code Jesse once lived by. Jesse James dies in his own home, killed by someone he considered a friend, someone he'd tried to mentor. The news reaches Allan Pinkerton in Chicago. He's 62 years old now, his health failing, his agency's reputation still damaged from the Missouri raid 7 years earlier. Jesse James is finally dead, but the Pinkertons can't claim credit. They can't admit to the years of pressure, manipulation, and psychological warfare that made the betrayal possible. The official story gives all credit to Robert Ford and Governor Crittenden. But those who understand how these things work, who've watched the Pinkertons operate for years, they know the truth. The hunt for Jesse James wasn't won in a single moment of violence. It was won through systematic destruction of a man's ability to trust, to rest, to live anything approaching a normal life. It was won by making survival itself unbearable. Robert Ford becomes the most hated man in America. He'd hoped for fame and fortune, for recognition as the man who ended Jesse James. Instead, he's the dirty little coward who shot Mr. Howard. He's driven from town to town, unable to escape his own infamy. The reward money runs through his fingers like water. He opens a saloon in Colorado, but even there he can't escape. Men come just to threaten him, to spit at him, to remind him of what he did. In 1892, just 10 years after killing Jesse, Robert Ford is himself shot and killed in his own establishment. The Pinkertons continue their work, but they're never quite the same. The Missouri raid remains a stain on their reputation. Allan Pinkerton dies in 1884, never fully recovering from the criticism that followed his agency's most controversial operation. His sons continue the business, but with more restraint, more awareness of public perception. Frank James, Jesse's older brother, surrenders himself 6 months after Jesse's death. He's tried twice for murder and robbery. Both times he's acquitted, juries swayed by sympathy and the passage of time. He lives until 1915, dying peacefully at the age of 72, having spent his final decades giving tours of the James family farm and selling stones from Jesse's grave as souvenirs. He never expresses remorse for his outlaw years, but he never glorifies them either. He simply survived. Zerelda Samuel, the mother who lost her son and her youngest child to the violence that consumed her family, lives until 1911. She never forgives the Pinkertons. She gives interviews late in life, her missing arm a constant reminder of that winter night in 1875. She speaks of Jesse not as a criminal, but as a victim of northern aggression, of corporate power run amok. Whether this is delusion or a mother's desperate need to find meaning in tragedy, no one can say for certain. The mythology around Jesse James only grows after his death. Dime novels become serious biographies. Songs are written. Movies are made. He becomes the quintessential American outlaw, the rebel against authority, the Confederate soldier who never stopped fighting. But that mythology obscures a darker truth about what the hunt for Jesse James revealed. The Pinkertons, in their relentless pursuit, showed how private interests could wield power that rivaled government itself. They showed how the line between justice and revenge could disappear when resources and desperation combined. They pioneered techniques of surveillance and infiltration that would become standard practice in law enforcement and intelligence work. They proved that you could destroy a man without ever confronting him directly, that psychological pressure applied over years could be more effective than any physical force. Jesse James spent the last years of his life looking over his shoulder, trusting no one, moving from place to place like a ghost haunting his own existence. The Pinkertons made him into something less than human and more than mortal, a symbol of resistance that had to be destroyed because symbols are dangerous to established power. But in destroying Jesse James, the Pinkertons also destroyed something in themselves. They became the very thing they claimed to fight against. A ruthless force operating outside traditional bounds of law and morality, willing to sacrifice innocence in pursuit of their goals, answerable to no one but the corporate interests that paid their fees. The dead boy, Archie Samuel, is buried in a Missouri cemetery. His grave is smaller than his half-brother's famous resting place, visited by fewer people, remembered by history as a footnote to a larger tragedy. But in many ways, his death encapsulates the entire story. He was an innocent destroyed by forces he couldn't understand, caught between men fighting wars that had supposedly ended years before. The Pinkertons' deadly hunt for Jesse James succeeded in its ultimate goal. They got their man, even if the final act was performed by someone else's hand. But the cost was measured in more than dollars and years. It was measured in trust destroyed, communities fractured, lives ruined, and principles abandoned. It showed America something about itself that it wasn't quite ready to see, that the machinery of justice, when divorced from accountability and restraint, could be just as destructive as the outlaws it pursued. And so the dust continues to hang in the Missouri air, never quite settling, still asking questions that nobody wants to answer. Questions about justice and revenge, about law and power, about the price we're willing to pay to see our enemies destroyed. The Pinkertons and Jesse James are both long dead now, but the story they wrote together remains, a cautionary tale about what happens when the hunt becomes more important than the principles that justified it in the first place. In the end, everyone involved was diminished by it. Jesse James died young, paranoid, and betrayed. The Pinkertons survived, but never fully recovered their reputation. Robert Ford lived and died in infamy. Frank James endured but lost his brother in his youth to a cause that couldn't win. Zerelda Samuel buried her children and lived with the physical and emotional scars until her final breath. The only real victor was time itself, which took them all eventually and left us with nothing but stories. Stories about what people will do when they believe the ends justify the means. Stories about how hunting monsters can make monsters of the hunters. Stories about the American frontier in all its violent, complicated, morally ambiguous glory. And the dust never settles. Not really. It just keeps hanging there, waiting for the next wind to stir it up, waiting for the next person to walk through it and wonder what it all meant. This deadly hunt that consumed so many lives and revealed so much about who we are when the veneer of civilization wears thin.